Today on Sports Central, we go over our next schedule preview this offseason, and it's going to be over the Michigan Wolverines, one of your big surprise teams of the 2021 college football season. And this team had an outstanding season in 2021, to say the least. They finally beat Ohio State. They won the Big Ten and made it to the college football playoffs. So definitely an outstanding season for this team. But how will they be in 2022 is what we'll be going over here today. We'll be going over the players that this team will be losing, who they'll be returning, and also looking at their schedule for the first time this offseason, starting out with some notable games from last season. And there were a lot of them for Michigan. This team was 12-2 overall in the 2021 season. They beat Wisconsin in early October, 38-17, and that's really where we started to see this team as a real football team. Obviously, they were a huge disappointment in 2020. So going into 2021, this team we knew had a tremendous amount of talent, but the expectations were low for the very reason as 2020 was just a disappointing season for this team. But they also beat Penn State on the road, 21-17, huge win against one of their rivals there. Beat Maryland at 59-18 in that game there. In the second to last week of the regular season. That's really where the hot streak started for this Michigan team, and they got hot at the right time, that is for sure. Beat Maryland 59-18, and they beat Ohio State 42-27. That was quite a game, I can imagine, for Michigan fans, and something that Wolverines are going to remember for a long time. They're taking down number 2 Ohio State, and that was the game that kind of sealed the deal for the Big Ten championship. And in that game, they routed Iowa 42-3. Taking them to the college football playoff where they played Georgia, and turns out the Bulldogs would be your national champions, and they took the loss there 11-34. But yeah, Georgia last season, they were an exceptional football team. That was a very good team last season in Georgia, so I wouldn't take that loss too terribly. This team definitely showed a lot of progress last year, and this team is returning a lot of important talent going into next season, so I don't think this was the only season where Michigan is going to be a contender for the college football playoff. First 7 games, they were 7-0. They were undefeated for a long time, and then they were, of course, 5-2 in their last 7. Their one loss of the season was to Michigan State, kind of in the middle of the season there, which that was a game that they should have won. They controlled that game for a long time, but Sparty came back and got that huge win for them. But in the end, Michigan did get to the college football playoff over them. Here's your roster preview for this team. Of course, you got your quarterbacks, Cade McNamara and J.J. McCarthy, both coming back. And it's kind of an interesting quarterback situation. You got 2 talented quarterbacks. McNamara was the primary starter last season, and McCarthy played some over the course of the season. And I feel like personally, McCarthy just shows more potential as a quarterback. McNamara, we've seen him quite a bit more than McCarthy, so I'm looking forward to seeing in spring ball what both the quarterbacks are able to do. But I wouldn't be surprised one bit if J.J. McCarthy did win that starting position over the course of this offseason, just because he's a quarterback that definitely, I think, shows a lot of potential, and he definitely, both quarterbacks are great for sure, but J.J. McCarthy in particular. But McNamara last season, 2,500 yards, 15 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. So overall, not bad stats and nothing too insane, but he also had a 64% completion rate. So his accuracy was better than McCarthy when they played over the course of the season. McCarthy's completion rate was right around 58% or so. But then again, he only took 59 passes this season, so you got to take that into consideration as well. But yeah, definitely an interesting quarterback situation with Michigan. Hassan Haskins is gone. He was your top running back last season, 1,400 yards, 20 touchdowns. A very underrated football player, if you ask me. He definitely deserved way more attention than he was getting. And of course, you got Blake Corum, who it looks like he was injured for a good chunk of last season, and he's going to be coming back. So Blake Corum is a big impact player on this offense. Watch out for him. He could potentially be one of the best running backs in the nation next year if he can stay healthy. And he put up over 1,000 yards, 12 touchdowns last year. So Blake Corum, watch out for him. He is a major impact player, and Hassan Haskins, of course, was the primary back for a good chunk of the season, but he is gone, and Blake Corum is going to have a huge impact on this team next season. So I'm not too concerned about the backfield at all, especially if Corum stays healthy. As for the receiving position, Cornelius Johnson is coming back. He put up 650 yards, 3 touchdowns on the season. Definitely a player to watch out for there. Eric All, your tight end, and your second in receiving over the course of the season is coming back as well. He put up 400 yards, and Roman Wilson as well. And then you got Mike Sandstrel, who is also coming back. So you got a great look. You got tremendous depth in your receiving position there. And of course, your tight end Eric All is coming back. He's going to be a huge impact player. And of course, we just went over, of course, you got Johnson and Wilson and Sanderstall as well. So, I mean, this receiving core looks great going into next season, and this offense in general, I really like going into next year. So, fancifully, Michigan could be a really good football team. And, I mean, usually you see out of a surprise team in a college football season, usually they'll lose a lot of talent after that season, but kind of the opposite for Michigan. This team is getting a lot of players back, and I mean, the depth is going to be really good on this Michigan football team going into next year. Offensive line looks great as well, but defensively, you do lose a couple of really key players. Hutchinson, of course, who's going to be one of the top picks in this upcoming draft. He is going to be gone, so that's going to be a tough loss there in Hutchinson. I mean, he was such a huge impact player on the defensive line this season, so watch out for him being gone. Jeter, of course, is also gone on the defensive line there. Hawkins, one of your players in the secondary, is going to be gone as well. Stuber on your offensive line is gone, as well as Vastardis. So offensive line, you do lose a couple there, but overall I'm not too concerned about that. Defensively, of course, Hutchinson and Jeter and Hawkins, those three in particular, are going to be pretty tough losses. But lots of great production coming back otherwise. I'm pretty confident that this Michigan football team is going to be able to build on what they did this season for sure. So chances at another college football playoff run in 2022, I would say, is pretty likely for this football team. Of course, you got to get past Ohio State as it usually comes down to in that Big Ten East division. You got Ohio State and Michigan usually towards the top, and that game at the end of the season is always such a crucial one. So for Michigan, you'll probably have to beat Ohio State again if you want to get to the Big Ten Championship and to the college football playoffs. So that game in November is going to be a crucial one for this football team as always. But what's new, that's always such a huge game for both these teams. And Michigan won it last year, and look where Michigan ended up in the college football playoffs. So, but here's your transfer portal and recruiting for next year. Nothing too crazy going on in the transfer portal for Michigan. You got Dan Villari, of course, one of your backup quarterbacks who is at Syracuse now. Darian Green took off to Nevada. George Johnson to UMass. So a couple of defensive backs, but they didn't really have too big of impacts last season. You do have an offensive lineman, Victor Oluwademi, who is coming in from Virginia. So definitely a key player there that's going to be added on the offensive line. Recruiting-wise, this team is actually ranked number 8 in the nation, so looks pretty good recruiting-wise for Michigan. Big Ten rank is number 3, and you got some great recruits coming in, so definitely a great sign for the future of this Michigan football program. But that's it. Let's look at your schedule going into next season here. You start off the season with Colorado State at home, Hawaii as well, UConn, Maryland. So your September is actually pretty simple. You're at home the entire month. Plus, I mean, your non-conference schedule is very simple, I'm going to be honest. I mean, UConn is a pretty terrible football team, probably the worst in the FBS. Colorado State's had their issues, and Hawaii's a decent football team, but, I mean, you should take control of that game. So you should start the season 4-0 for sure. Maryland, of course, could be decent, but it's a home game, so I wouldn't expect anything too crazy to go on there. Iowa, Indiana on the road. Then you got Penn State at home, Michigan State at home. So your October is where things pick up a bit. And then in November, you got Rutgers on the road, Nebraska at home, Illinois at home. Then, of course, your big game to finish out the season, Ohio State on the road this year. So you do not have home field advantage against Ohio State this year around. You have to go to Columbus to play the Buckeyes. But that's it. Let's look at your first 6 games here. What I'm predicting, easy wins easily for the first 3 ones, or for the first 3 games of the season. Colorado State, Hawaii, UConn, all not very good football teams. So you should get 3 pretty easy wins there. So your non-conference, that could come back to bite a little bit, especially considering, I mean, even your conference schedule isn't terribly difficult. I mean, your crossover games into the Big Ten West are Iowa, Nebraska, and Illinois. All 3 teams that, I mean, Iowa's a pretty good team, but otherwise, I mean, Nebraska could be decent, but Illinois is bottom feeder. So, but yeah, for Michigan, I mean, this team, they have a pretty easy schedule in comparison to some Big Ten teams, so that is something to keep in mind. But I do expect this team to probably be favored in their first 6 games. Maryland, Iowa, potentially. I mean, Iowa could be a tougher one maybe on the road, but I do expect Michigan to probably be the favorite there. And Indiana, of course, was a mess last season, so who knows? Maybe they are better this season. We'll see what happens, but as of right now, I'm going to predict an easy win against Indiana as well. And looking at your second half, Penn State, that's really where things start to heat up a bit. You got Penn State and Michigan State. Both teams are looking pretty good going into next season. Penn State in particular, I like a decent amount, but both games are at home, so that is going to be a help for Michigan, is having both teams with home field advantage in the Big House. So Penn State and Michigan State, I'm going to favor Michigan in both of those games, and you also do have a bye week in between those 2 games. So that could help as well. And looking at November, Rutgers, easy win on the road there in Piscataway. Then you got Nebraska coming to town. I'm going to keep that as a yellow game for now just because there's a lot of uncertainty around Nebraska. I like where this team is headed. They got a lot of great transfers going in. So Nebraska potentially a closer game, maybe, and we also saw Nebraska play Michigan really close last year. And so, we'll see what happens there. But I'm gonna still favor Michigan in that game for sure. And then Illinois, easy win. And then Ohio State finish out the season. We're still a long ways out from that game, so I can't really be predicting too much about that one yet. But I'm going to say Ohio State's going to be favored in that game just with it being on the road. I expect Ohio State to potentially be undefeated going into that game. So, I wouldn't be surprised with that Ohio State game if both teams were 11-0 going into that game. So, and obviously, it's always just a huge game for both teams, huge rivalry game, one of the biggest rivalries in all football. I would say the greatest one in all football as well. But that being said, I'm going to favor Ohio State in that game right now, but definitely Michigan. They beat them last season, so, there's no reason to believe why they couldn't this year. But record prediction is going to be 10-2 to 12-0 for Michigan. And once again, this is just a schedule preview, so I'll be predicting every game for Michigan game by game once we get to later spring and into summer, so stay tuned for that. But that being said, that's going to wrap it up for today. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on the Wolverines, and I appreciate you guys all watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.